Hello and welcome to another episode of the Be Awesome podcast. This is Joshua Peach, and I am someplace I am not normally at and haven't been at for a couple of years, which is my home office. Only because these two guests, they couldn't do it any other time, and I just want to grasp at what I could. So, one has been, I don't even know how many times he's been on the podcast. Every time he's put out a book, anyway, he's been on the podcast. So at least three. So I got return guest John Cady, childhood friend, long time. We've known each other over probably 40 years, I guess, at this point.
Yep.
And welcome back. And then new to the podcast, this guy, we go back to junior high school anyway, but probably before that, we go back to grade school playing soccer
Yep.
with your parents driving us to the tournaments in the Toyota minivan. You guys are the coolest things since sliced bread, right? This is none other than Kilsyth Road, Easton, Massachusetts, born and bred, or not born and bred. Were you born in Brockton or were you born in Easton?
Yeah, I was 2 years old when I
Yeah,
came to Easton.
yeah. So basically, born and bred Easton resident, now turned Florida, Mr. Mark Morrow. So welcome, Mark. He looks
Thank
like
you,
he,
Joe.
it looks like the man behind the curtain with the green backdrop and everything, doesn't he, John?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, he's the wizard. He's the Wizard of Oz. So let's get into this. So here's the backdrop. Um, and this is amazing stuff about my life and how cool, um, it just things just happen. I hadn't talked to Mark. Mark graduated with John in the 90s. I actually was supposed to graduate with him, but I spent the next year in high school. I was the smart one. And haven't talked to Mark probably a long time. It was at least 20 years. And we reconnected during COVID. I can remember I was making the drive up to the North Shore, and you and I spoke for about an hour, and I've stayed in a little bit of contact. And John's still here in Easton. We can't get out of here even if we wanted to.
Yeah.
Um, and somehow in conversation a couple of weeks ago, Mark said, "Hey, I'm going to be doing this podcast about John F. Kennedy," and I said, "Why?" And told me something I had no idea. Knowing him all these years, you have been doing research and reading into this and kind of coming up with, I guess, a theory or an idea or something that's different from what everyone else is saying. And tell me more. We really didn't go into detail, but I was baffled that you have been doing this since we were 12, and I didn't know until 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I forget sometimes about it, how much time I've put into it. There's been times where I was more active in researching it, always looking at it. There wasn't a year I never looked at it, but there were times where I was more heavily involved than others. And I didn't even realize at one point how much I'd learned. It was kind of crazy. It was like all of a sudden I just realized I was at this point and I was connected with all these authors in the industry and um, realized that people started coming to me and asking me questions about it. So um, it just started to come to the forefront again this time of the year because 62nd anniversary of his death passed a little over 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So it's kind of wild how it all happened.
Yeah. And how did it start? Like, how did you,
It was my grandfather. He was a big Kennedy fan, and he was devastated by his death. And he did not want his children or grandchildren growing up with a government that was telling lies to its people and getting away with it. He was very upset about that, and he was never going to let it go. So he taught me everything that he could at the time, and then I kind of took it a step further. Ended up being 12 years after he passed away. I had a weird freak accident and broke and dislocated my elbow and had some extra time on my hand in 2012 and just really dug into it during that time and came to my final conclusions at that time.
yeah. And I don't know how much you want to give away because you've got a podcast where you're basically tell us about the podcast first and foremost.
Yeah, covering all different topics about the assassination. There's lots of different areas of the assassination. It's really interesting. There's one guy that specializes in nothing but the Secret Service. There's another guy that specializes in kind of like ballistics and forensics and all that stuff. And uh, there's all different, again, it's like categories the guys excuse me, that are experts in. And Yeah, I just started focusing more on the why it happened. But
Mhm.
in that process, you kind of get sucked into the whole stuff, like with the shots, where they came from, who were the, shooters and stuff like that, which is one of the most difficult things to find out. You probably find out more about the why than you can who actually pulled the trigger. But uh, that was kind of like the process that I went through is focusing on the why. And it really brought me into a deep understanding of not just the JFK assassination, but it took me into US history going all the way back to the early 1900s and up to present day. So that was kind of what happened there.
Yeah. And so you're gonna have are you gonna have guests or is it just gonna be you and John?
Well, one of them was just me and John, and the other one was just me. Well, the other
Mhm.
three were just me. So it's going to vary. There are going to be varying lengths. There'll be some that are an hour. There's one on there that's only 7 minutes long. It just depends on the topic and how much depth I'm going to go into. Yeah, I'm not going to talk about who actually I think was ultimately responsible today. You can watch the
Yeah.
the nearly 1 hour podcast that me and John did to find that out. I will certainly talk about how you can do your own research and kind of like a little bit of a cheat code and a couple books that you could read to really get up to speed and understand if you're starting from scratch so you don't have to go through 38 years like I did
Yeah.
because there really are probably six books and three really solid books that could give you a pretty good understanding of what happened. And I'll tell you right now, those two books by Fletcher Prouty. That would be The Secret Team, which kind of goes over government structure and how uh, people of influence could control the government without even having the president under their control. You kind of needed a combination of the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, and the Deputy Director of the Central Intelligence Agency. Prouty was a government insider that was a liaison between the CIA and the military. So his other book was called JFK, and that's got like a subtitle to it. I think it's like Vietnam and the plot to assassinate JFK or something like that. But you just look up Fletcher Prouty and you can find his two books. And then there's another one by a friend of mine named Richard DeSocio, who wrote a book called Clash of Dynasties. And those three books really could kind of give you a really good understanding of what happened.
Yeah. Well, I'm just glad that I knew that. I haven't been to my office in forever, and I'll give you four other good books. The trilogy of Angela of Death, right here,
Nice.
by none other than John Cady,
Yeah.
Nice.
and of course, no better than Be Awesome. They're not going to
Yep.
give you the inside line on JFK, but they'll give you some good reading. So,
Nice.
no, that's good. And we'll put the books in the show notes. John, how did you get into this? You seem to be able to get into just about anything. JFK conspiracy podcast. Is this, did you know, first of all, did you know that Mark was into this back when we were kids?
No, so which is funny, I was big into John F. Kennedy in general. Like my parents used to bring me to like his I've been to his the house he grew up in a couple times. I've been to the library I don't know how many times when I was a kid, and then I got into I got into the assassination and I started, I only read like which I thought was a lot at the time. Until I met Mark, I thought it was, I mean, until I not met Mark. I've known Mark my whole life, but until I knew that he was into the Kennedy assassination, like I thought 5 books was a lot. And then he's like, oh, I read like 30. I'm like, this 30 books? And he's like, that's hundreds. And I'm like, whoa. So I'm like, I thought I was like a big, not fan, fan's not the right word, but I thought I was big into it. And then when I met, like when he started telling me about how into it he was, I'm like, okay, I don't even scratch the surface. Like you were like way below the surface. I don't even scratch it. But that's how I got into that. And then, Mark, we've been friends since as long as I can remember because he grew up on Kilsyth and I live on Blackbrook, so
Yeah. For non-Easton people in the 80s, there were two streets that were connected, and every single house had at least two kids, I think it seemed
yeah,
like. I mean,
it's huge.
this was every single house on both streets seemed to have kids. That was like the probably the greatest concentration of kids in our town. And so Mark and John were two of the couple hundred. that were on that street that connected Center Street to Summer Street that took you to the schools, Park View at the time, the junior high school and the high school. So that was a place to be. If you didn't live there, you wanted to hang out there. That was for sure, right?
Yep.
Some
So
wild times there.
so you're 12 years old, you start doing this, it goes on the shelf. 2012 rolls around, you hurt your elbow, you get some time to do some more digging. Here we are in 2025. There's all sorts of dozens of books, which uh, like and these books, like, aren't they all supposed to be like based on fact? I mean, are they all based on fact, just spoken differently, or
Well,
what's
we don't, the thing is, we really don't know because the government was running a program in the 60s called Operation Mockingbird. This
hmm
is documented now. Like it's not like some conspiracy or anything. Everybody knows about it. It's been, I don't know if it's been declassified or it's just like well known that the CIA was putting uh, anybody from media to authors on their payroll to throw out a narrative that was to their benefit. And one of the things that they did, what that was very complicated, it's called in the intelligence community, it's called a limited hangout. And what they would do is they would admit to some information that was true and then
hmm
combine it with a bunch of information that was false. So there's people that have written books and you read half of the book and you say, this makes a lot of sense. And then you read the rest of it and you're like, this sounds like a fairy tale.
Yeah.
Um, and you don't know whether that author was somebody that was paid by an intelligence agency. It's very difficult to tell. There are books that are more fact uh, based, certainly, than others. There's guys out there that specifically try to stay away from speculation, like James D'Ingenio. He's the one who Oliver Stone based his new JFK documentary that came out a couple years ago. There's Jeff Krugel, a friend of mine who's got a podcast, JFK: The Enduring Secret. Very much to the facts, to the point. Lets you decide what you want to think. Doesn't really try to gear you in any way. Will give you both sides of the coin and kind of let you figure it out. But yeah, it's very complicated out there. You really just don't know what you're reading is valid. And then you have people that were um, monetarily driven. So they may have been selling a particular angle and maybe embellishing it, or maybe even, straight up lying.
hmm
Um, there's a woman who claims that there was a comment that she was um a mistress of Lyndon Baines Johnson, LBJ, and she said that there was a party the night before the assassination. She claims all these people, like Hoover, were there. Um, all the I don't know if she said Dulles, who was the ex-CIA director, but all sorts of people that were commonly associated or being tied to the JFK assassination being at this party. And she said LBJ comes out of the party and says, after tomorrow, these Kennedys will, never disrespect me again. And then he gets
hmm
assassinated. The problem with this woman's story is she wrote, number one, she wrote a book, she got compensated for it. Number two, she accused somebody of being involved with the JFK assassination that was dead in 1961, 2 years before the assassination ever happened.
hmm
So, unfortunately, what I think happened in this case is her mind might have been slipping.
hmm
And so she can't be relied upon as a really good witness. And there's people out there that swear by her, but you can't swear by people that can't remember important details like that. So
Yeah, maybe it was
Yeah.
JFC and not JFK, right, John?
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yeah,
Uh,
these guys are razzing me after all these years of friendship, and make this time here, and I'm on the plane. I'm at 36,000 feet, text back and forth, and I say, hey, I'll send you the Zoom, and I haven't slept in like 2 days, and I'll send you the Zoom tomorrow. And I'm like, man, I'm texting these guys. I can do it on my phone, and I fat fingered JFC instead of JFK, and there's John right there, the comedian, to let me know, ask me when it should be told that it was JFK and not JFC. So maybe it was this mistress that had it wrong, and that's what I was going off of. Um, did you? So let me ask you this:
Mhm.
how close and accurate today is what your grandfather taught you 38 years ago? Did your grandfather have it pretty good?
Yeah, so he felt that
Don't give
he
it away
definitely.
now. Don't give it
Yeah, well,
away.
this wouldn't be giving it away. This is this is very common knowledge. He did believe the vice president, Lyndon Baines Johnson, was involved. He did believe the ex-CIA director, Alan Dulles, was involved, and he did believe J. Edgar Hoover was involved. And it may never be able to be actually proven because these people are dead. You can't take them to
Yeah.
court. And it might be, how do I say this? There's just a ton of smoke with all these people pointing to their involvement. One piece of advice that I give people is, don't look at the JFK assassination as we're going to solve this and, find these people guilty of murder. You should really be looking at it as a uh, obstruction of justice, right? Did these people obstruct justice and lie in their process of investigating this investigation and presenting it to the United States? And it's pretty clear that those people were doing that.
Hmm.
There's lots of instances like that. Even our former president, Gerald Ford, altered testimony in the Warren Commission to better suit the single bullet theory, which is not, nobody really widely accepts that. And he admits to altering the wording on this, some of the wounds to better fit this. He basically admitted to lying and obstructing justice and the truth. And it's very sad. It's very embarrassing that he did this, and very hurtful to the country. And it's a complete stain on his legacy.
Hmm.
So I think my grandfather is very close, but the one thing that he wasn't able to do was really tie it all together. And I think that's another common thing that happens with the assassination is people say stuff like, the CIA did it, the mafia did it, the Secret Service was involved, the FBI was involved. And it sounds kind of almost crazy when you hear that because I don't actually believe that these organizations were involved on on an organizational level.
Hmm.
And this was an example I, gave to John that's on the podcast. Uh, you can't blame an entire organization for the actions of a small group. And, we're all from New England here. When Aaron Hernandez went berserk and started killing people, we never said the New England Patriots killed people.
Yeah.
It was Aaron Hernandez that did it.
Hmm.
People make actions, not organizations, and it's not fair, at least in my opinion, to blame a whole group for the actions of a couple bad apples. And Alan Dulles, was fired by JFK and was put on the Warren Commission. That's a major red flag right there. You put a guy that got fired and put him in charge of investigating one of his arch enemies. It just doesn't make any sense. Um, yeah, it's just complete ludicrous. But if you think about it, he was fired, so he was no longer part of the CIA. And one thing a lot of people might not realize is there's a handful of people in the CIA or that were in the CIA that have already admitted to being involved in the assassination. Um, so, people say, oh, CIA wasn't involved. Yeah. Well, you had a few people that have made deathbed confessions, or straight out confessions that they're involved in some way.
Hmm.
Um, the problem with those is they're CIA, so their job was to lie. So how can you know how
Right.
much of what it's that whole limited hangout thing, which parts are true and which parts are lie. And you have to kind of decipher that and say what part of this information makes sense and is logical and which part is junk. Um, so John McCone was the head of the CIA. There's virtually zero evidence that he had anything to do with the assassination, at least before it happened. Um, so, how can you blame the CIA if the main guy in the CIA wasn't involved? And then
Hmm.
how can you blame the mafia? You know, Carlo Gambino was the mob boss at that time. There's zero evidence he had anything to do with it. Now there's three other guys that seem to have had some involvement and um, that, but there's no evidence Gambino knew anything. It looks like they were acting on their own.
Is
So I think what happened, my grandfather had a very good idea of some of the players, but he couldn't figure out really what tied it all together.
mhm.
And that's what I focused on.
So we're talking 1963 was when JFK was assassinated.
Yeah.
1987, 25 years later, your
Yep.
grandfather gets you into this, and now 38 years later, we're still talking about it. That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. J- and-
Yeah. And this is, it's a great point you're bringing up. The topic's never going to die. There's a group of researchers, and I'd like to thank all those guys that came before me in the 60s, 70s, and 80s that laid the groundwork, like Mark Lane, um, people like that who did a lot of research and they uncovered a lot. They didn't uncover the whole story and they missed a lot, but they laid the groundwork for everybody else. And there's a whole community that they will not give up. And the reason they won't give up is because they
Right.
believe our country was hijacked when that happened. It probably really happened, many times before that as well. But um, they believe because of the this overtake of the government essentially that the problem still exists. And if we don't do something about it, our country's in trouble. And
Mhm.
it doesn't matter what side of the political spectrum you're on. I don't think anybody can really deny this country is in a lot of trouble and has been for quite a long time.
Yeah.
But so, that so because since I started doing the since I did the podcast with him, I joined a couple of the groups on Facebook just dedicated to the assassination, and it's like, Josh, when I tell you that, like, I swear every hour, if not every like half hour, there's a new post of like,
Hmm.
and people get heated over it. Like it's
Mhm.
crazy at some point. And then like one of them was one day, and I don't even know if the person was just trolling people or if he really believed it, but like he was saying that George Harrison of the Beatles had something to do with it, and I'm like, what? But it was like, but it's entertaining to the point where you're like, okay, I need to see where this person's bringing this. But yeah, that's how
Yeah.
in 2025, that's how much people are still into it, like completely into it.
Yeah, and there's I believe in, strong research and, back up as much as you can as possible, that there is an element of people that will believe literally any conspiracy that's put out there.
They
Uh,
want one. They just want one. It doesn't matter what it is.
yeah, and there's these people that there's three really crazy theories. There's one that Jackie shot him. There's one that the driver shot him, and there's one that the Secret Service agent in the follow-up car accidentally shot him. And they are theories that are fairly easy to prove, are not valid with a high degree of probability. And these people just will not let it go and insist on these things being true. It's almost like a form of mental illness. There'll be another conspiracy theory they believe related to JFK that conflicts with the other one, so they both can't be true, and they still believe both of them.
Yeah.
So it's wild out there. There's people that still insist that Lee Harvey Oswald was, guilty and the only one involved. That in itself, in my opinion, is a wild conspiracy theory. Like if it's so out of whack for that to have even been possible. It just doesn't make sense. I'll, allow people if they want to think Lee Harvey Oswald might have been involved in some way, shape, or form, fine. But there's been so much research out there that proves multiple shooters. Um, that whole lone nut theory has really been as close to it's ever been being destroyed.
Hmm. So I'm trying to think of, I mean, everything. And I think that when you mentioned like it's almost like a mental illness where people want that conspiracy theory, if you will.
Yeah,
It's kind of like the way that, but it's almost we're almost all destined for a conspiracy theory thought of something because of the way that the news is presented to us, right?
yeah,
The news always breaks with the story as it's unfolding.
right.
We very rarely see it when it's all completely finalized with all of the facts. And the reality is, very rarely does, I mean, this Kohlberger, the guy that murdered the students
Hmm.
out in was it where were they? Wyoming or out in West. I'm drawing a blank on which state exactly it was, but he admitted to it because he wanted to take a lesser charge and didn't want the death penalty or whatever. And there's still people, even though he said he did it and he pled guilty, people still say maybe he didn't do it, right?
Yep,
The Mangione, right?
yep.
And you have people that say the camera here, the camera there, whatever. But JFK is, I mean, is this known? I don't maybe you guys have looked this. Is this the most popular conspiracy theory event that's happened in our time anyway, or in our last 100 years, or is there something bigger? And second part of that question, is there any other conspiracy theories that you follow? Or are you just a diehard JFK guy? You're just so dug into this?
9
Um,
9/11 is probably a close second.
yeah, I'll make some comments about 9/11 in a second. Um, I would say other conspiracies that were pretty big. I mean, it's before our time, but Roswell certainly was a big one.
Yeah.
I'm not big into that, but I casually follow it. The big thing right now is Charlie Kirk assassination, and
Hmm.
I actually did a short podcast on that one. And to most people's surprise, I guess I'm going to give it away a little bit here. My thing at this point is I don't see a conspiracy. Um, there's all this false information that's being put out there. It's this, I don't, people are sick, they'll put fake stuff out there. Like the guy, there was no autopsy. Yeah, there was an autopsy. There's going to be a trial and they're going to talk about it. Um, the next day, the scene of the crime, they destroyed it all. Not true either. They did unfortunately change things around and remove the cement. I think it was like a month later they did it. They fully photographed it and everything. Not a great look for the government. They probably should have just let it be until the trial
Hmm.
was over. But everybody's claiming it's a conspiracy. Oh, and it's not him in the pictures. You can eat something one day and your face is going to look a little bit different the next day. If you eat too much of something that's not good for you, your face might
Hmm.
look a little puffy. You get a different angle, different sunlight. So I'm open to there being a potential conspiracy there, but I just don't see one. And um, I am going to withhold judgment on that until there's a trial and we see all the evidence. I think it's very important not to come to conclusions it what's it when because it's like the boy who cried wolf, right? You start to make
Hmm.
all these other conspiracies that are real conspiracies look crazy
Yeah.
when you're making all these wild accusations out there. 9/11, I'm not sure on that one. Like if I had to guess what happened there, it's more subtle than people think. Like people say the planes didn't hit the building, blah blah blah. Like I personally know people that saw the planes hit the building, so you can't fake that stuff.
Terry Hedrick and we were at Ground Zero. We didn't see the planes hit the building, but we saw the destruction afterwards 3 days later. And
Wow.
it was, yeah, we were the first. Terry and I were on the first elevator up to the top of the Empire State Building.
Wow, that's
Yeah,
crazy.
yeah.
I think if anything happened there, that you can say that maybe the government knew something was going to happen and they just let it happen because they wanted the war. But there are some very weird similarities to the JFK assassination and 9/11. Um, so, one of the big motives of the JFK assassination, in my opinion, was the Vietnam War. Kennedy didn't want it. He made some public comments that were leaning towards like, all right, we're pulling out of here, but it was more privately that he was telling people, we're not going into Vietnam. And that was going to hurt a lot of people. So Fletcher Prouty has this concept he calls preparing the battlefield, right? So most people don't realize before Kennedy was assassinated, 3 weeks before, the president of Vietnam was assassinated. And it was a coup that Kennedy actually approved, but Kennedy approved a peaceful um, removal of power. And he
Hmm.
didn't approve his death. They just were going to arrest him. There was a lot of shady stuff that this guy was into. I don't want to get into stuff that might be unsubstantiated, but there was some very nasty stuff this guy in Vietnam was involved with, and Kennedy probably was aware of it. Um, and there were There's all kinds of problems with this guy. So, for better or worse, Kennedy was not perfect. So he did approve a foreign government official to be removed from power, and then the CIA they just killed him
Hmm.
and blamed it on his generals or whatever. But you can't have if the guy in Vietnam certainly wasn't going to support the kind of war that we wanted either. So he had to be removed first. So he's killed. Now, if you go back to 9/11, most people don't remember this, but there was assassination a few days before 9/11. There was a
Hmm.
Mujahideen leader that was assassinated supposedly by an Al Qaeda member. Um, and again, why would the Mujahideen have any interest at that point in going after Al Qaeda? They hadn't done anything in years. So, how do you get them to want to go after Al Qaeda?
Hmm.
You set up an assassination. You take the guy out, and then 9/11 happens, and we're pretty ripped, and now you got a reason to go in there.
Yeah.
But you have to have people on the ground in both countries willing to do that. And if you remember, shortly after 9/11, we went into Afghanistan, and the Mujahideen was the one who was fighting on the ground. We were just providing air support.
Hmm.
Mujahideen was not going to be involved in that fight if that assassination didn't happen.
Yeah.
So just like the Kennedy assassination, there was a event before that that happened. Um,
And
so
often overlooked because I didn't know either of those things. I don't remember it. And
yeah,
I'm sure they were both newsworthy. Well, the Kennedy part was obviously before we were even born, but I never. That's
right.
the first I actually. I'm sure it was someplace in a book or someplace I read about it, but
Yeah,
didn't capture it. So.
yeah, and the uh, the Vietnam War, shortly afterwards, there was a group formed to both finance companies that were supplying the military. There was like a consortium of a very large number of companies. I think it was over 150. It was set up very quickly to start supplying the U.S. government with military supplies to get that war going. And Johnson took it in a direction that led to the war and getting the war heated up and going. So it does look very much like the Vietnam War would have been one of the major reasons Kennedy was taken out. I think it goes a little deeper than that, though, in that, um, yeah, people wanted the Vietnam War. There's no doubt about that. There was the group of people that set up that consortium certainly wanted that, but it was more the threat he was to the CIA. The CIA was really muscle for corporate America.
Hmm.
There's a bunch of international assassinations. We killed or overthrew governments in Chile, Iran, Guatemala, um, and there's others as well. Um, that was part of the House. Uh, there was a Select Committee on Assassinations that was tied to the JFK assassination that started looking into all this stuff. So it's not like this was the first time this happened. There were a bunch of international assassinations that occurred before Kennedy. It's just the first time it happened inside the United States.
Yeah. So you're just an ordinary guy.
Yeah.
This is all information and things that anybody can get access to. You're not behind the scenes with the CIA or anything. You've just read
No,
up on all
no.
this stuff.
No, no. I made a joke the other day to see I should hire me as a PR person because I could spin this in a way. You had some people that were nothing to do. They didn't, you know, they were acting on their own. because we're really coming to a point where the CIA is coming close to having to admit some of their agents were involved.
Hmm.
There's a guy named Joanides who they've basically proven was brought into the Warren Commission and the House Select Committee on Assassinations to obstruct the investigation. There's a book coming out in the near future about this guy's involvement in that. And there's no question he hindered the investigation. That's a crime. Uh, and the CIA's got egg all over their face because of this. So I actually think there's a chance that that could happen. You could see some level of admission at some point.
Wow.
If the right people are put in power or stay in power over at the CIA. Um, yeah, they did it before. They've actually way back in the 80s. They let one of their agents, they call it, hanging out to dry. The guy's name was E. Howard Hunt, and he claimed, people claimed that he was in Dallas and involved with the assassination, and he denied it. And then he got caught lying on the stand by, he said his kids, could vouch for him that he was there. And he talked about some Chinese restaurant that he went to, and they found out the Chinese restaurant didn't even come into existence till 10 years later. So they caught him, and the CIA basically said, yeah, yeah, we think he was in Dallas that day. Um, so
Wow.
yeah, they admitted this guy was there. And this guy is also one of the people on his deathbed confession, death made a deathbed confession that he was involved. He claimed that he was a bench warmer in the assassination, that he wasn't directly involved, but he had a minor role in setting it up.
Hmm.
And he does name a few people, including LBJ, that he says were involved. Again, the problem with this guy is he's a liar. He's a
Yeah.
CIA agent, so by nature you're a liar. So you have to. It's part of the job. So we don't know which parts of what he's saying is true and which parts are not true. You can't, in fairness, even though he admitted to being involved, we can't know what parts he was actually telling the truth about.
Right. Yeah, that's what a life to live, right?
Yeah,
You're set to lie. You're basically you're living or leading a lie in a lot of ways, and at the end of the day, you're on your deathbed and you're saying, I want to confess all the truths, and people still question it because it's like we don't know what's true because you lied so much, right?
yeah, yeah,
That
yeah,
like all the answers could be right there. So
yeah. It's pretty wild.
yeah, the what's interesting is we could have all the answers come out tomorrow and people still wouldn't believe it.
Correct.
Definitely.
Isn't that, I mean, think about it. This is kind of the crazy life that we live in. I'm not a big social, I post stuff like this. I'll post on social media. I try not to doom scroll or get caught up in things. Um, and but on the like I was going to put something on Facebook today and I was just like I had to shut this off because there was a post from supposedly a reputable source about this girl that died tailgating at a Texas football game. I didn't even know
Hmm.
anything about it. And Mike Vrabel supposedly broke down in tears talking about it. And then all of a sudden I was looking at the comments because I was going to see where the story was. And like every comment's like, I saw Tom Brady say the same thing. I saw this person say the same thing. This is fake. This is AI. And I'm like, we're in a world where
Yeah,
we just don't know what is real anymore. It is
Hmm.
very much a very strange place that we live in. And even when real is right in front of us, we still question it.
yeah, yeah. 100%, 100%. Um, But my conclusions, oddly, back in 2012 when I had that injury, I started to write a book and I couldn't finish it. And then I found my friend Richard DeSocio's book, which basically came to the same conclusions that I did. And I'm like, shoot, I'm like, I'm not gonna bother finishing this. I don't have time. I'm never gonna do it. And you basically already, told the story the way I would have told it. So that's the Clash of Dynasties book, which is one that's definitely highly recommended.
Well, I'm going to ask you to text me all the different books because I think I got some of them, but I want to get this recording out.
Yeah, yeah, no
I want to get
problem. I would.
so, but so I guess are you gonna get back to writing the book, or are you just gonna leave it because he wrote enough of it close enough to what you got?
Yeah, it's close enough to what I got. I've actually helped him. Uh, he's got a second follow-up book coming out. One piece that I'll let go that's interesting is he found talk about parties like before the assassination. There was one after the assassination. A group of very wealthy people threw a party on November 22nd, 1965. It's kind of
Hmm.
disgusting if you think about it. What do you think, Josh, if somebody threw a party on September 11th, 2003? It wasn't a birthday party. Like, isn't
Yeah.
that a little weird?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, so he's going through some of the prime suspects that we think were behind and ultimately controlling LBJ, Dulles, and um, in Hoover were at this party.
Mhm.
There were a lot of other people too. It was just a really weird thing to have a party like that. It was a public party. There's documentation on it. That's going to be covered in his book. Um, and there was one thing that I found out just by searching some old records. There's somebody else that he was trying to tie to the assassination. And I found in the archives a document that tied this person to one of our primary suspects.
Hmm.
I believe that's going to be covered in his book as well. But maybe someday I'll finish it. I don't know. We'll see. But for the time being, I'm gonna let Richard do his thing and roll with it because he's doing a great job.
So I don't know how many communities did this. I know the community that my dad was in when Vietnam happened because he was in the Vietnam War. And we all know that Vietnam War veterans were not welcomed home
Hmm.
when they came back. Many communities, from what I understand, because I was asking my father like why they choose this day, and but many communities welcomed Vietnam veterans home for the first time on 9/11, 2011, 10-year
Oh wow,
anniversary 9/11.
that's wow. Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah. So there's your conspiracy theory of the day for me. Why did
Yeah,
they choose that day of all days of all the years after Vietnam to say that was the time to welcome people home? So
right.
I'm just thinking of that right now for the first time. So
Yeah,
now look what you just did to me. I was just
yeah,
having
yeah. And look, so back to JFK 9/11, you got the preparing of the battlefield, you had the two assassinations before the big event, then you have the big event, and then what happens afterwards? The wars.
yeah.
Uh, I mean, what was that war? 64, 65 to 75, and then Afghanistan was 2001 to 2020. What?
Yeah.
You had huge long wars after that that people profited from substantially. Um, and it's not the first time this has happened either. If you go back, one of the things that Richard covers in his book, and we don't have time to go over here today, is um, uh, even World War I, where our some wealthy people that had some control over our government were selling weapons to both us and the Germans, and that same thing was amplified in World War II. We did a ton of support to Germany, both before, during, and after the war, and a lot of people aren't aware of that. And there were all sorts of consortiums set up to finance both U.S. companies and German companies that were owned by U.S. investors. So a lot of people don't know anything about that, but this whole process of uh, funding wars and funding both sides of the war, unfortunately, goes back, over 125 years. Probably goes back thousands of years, but
Yeah.
throughout history. But it's something unfortunate that's gone on for a long time.
Well, this is my brain's like wrapping around on all sorts of ideas. I'm going to read these books. I'm going to listen to your podcast. And the cat has a cutoff time of 7, and I want to get this thing published here tonight.
Yeah.
Same day turnaround. So, how do people listen to your podcast? Where do they find you? On what platforms? How do they get a hold of you if they want to have a healthy debate, especially with John, in your chat rooms of the Beatles or whoever did it. But
Yeah,
give them all the rundown.
the podcast is JFK, The Final Investigation. You can find it on YouTube. Literally just got started a couple weeks ago. So there's 4 or 5 videos up, and we need subscribers. We want to get this out there. So appreciate you having us on
Yeah.
the show. And Yep, my email is there. You can get me at markjmorrow@gmail.com for questions about the assassination.
And the rare
And
Mark with a C, not with a K.
yep, yep, Mark C. So yeah, Mark with a C, J Morrow at gmail.com. And be happy to answer any questions that you have.
That's awesome. And John, you're excited about this whole thing. You've just been sitting back nodding your head. It's the people that don't most of 95+% of my views are audio only. So John's just been shaking his head and just listening along for this. This is the longest actually in 40 years that I've not heard you talk too much.
I know. Well, I knew it like so. Like I said, he knows so much more about it than I do that it's just like one of those things where I'm like, you like to hear him talk just because he's open, like you said, he's putting things in your mind that you wouldn't even have thought of,
Yeah.
but it makes sense, you know.
I'd love to find somebody that just makes me crazy with their theories and things that completely contradict anything that Mark believes, and just put him in a room and be like, "Hey, I want to introduce you to my friend here," and he says there was only one gunman, or it was this person, or it was that person, and then just
Oh yeah.
let Mark have a fun day of discussion with them. So.
Oh, that would be amazing to battle somebody like that. It'd be great. And yeah,
Put him in
look,
with the Beatles guy.
Yeah, yeah, that'd be
yeah,
great. Yeah,
yeah.
that'd be fantastic. And see how that goes. But the reality we'll leave on this is that you can't change a mind that's already set, right? So it's like you could
Yeah, that's
have
the
it,
tough
and
thing.
that's the hard part is debating with someone that isn't willing to debate. Like their feet are in the ground, and I don't know what to believe. I've grown to realize that the truth of many things will never be found. My dad was well, you guys know my dad. He was an interesting guy. He read the Globe and the Herald every day. I said, "Why do you read both those papers?" He goes, "Man, you read both sides, and then someplace in the middle is the truth. But we'll never really get that whole truth, right?" That's because there's money to be made in hypotheticals and theory and everything else more so than reality. A lot of the times, it's like it's kind of amazing how our brain works and how it triggers to come up with these assumptions that we believe or think happened, right? And I've had a couple of conversations down in Florida this week. I was down in Tampa, and I got into a couple of discussions about school safety, and in the conversations, it was like there was some things said that I I almost 100% know didn't happen in a school event. But I had to go back and like fact check and think about it. I'm like, did I really understand this right? Should I have an open mind to what this person's saying, or is it just complete BS? And that's, I think, the hardest thing with all these things is like, you just told a compelling story that gave nothing away about what happened. I'm going to listen and watch your whole program. But if I have a preset theory in my own, that there was no second gunman or third gunman or any of that stuff, it'd be hard pressed to think otherwise. But it's really cool that you've put this time and this effort and this research and all of this together that people that can come to the table will actually think about it and go, well, maybe this does make a little bit more sense. Um,
Yeah, and I want to thank you again, Josh, because I'm just an average guy, like you said. I think there are other people that really know what happened with this thing.
yeah,
People, and I've talked about this a little bit in the podcast of a lot more power and notoriety with me that know what happened, and they're afraid to say something because they're too big. And I think they might actually feel some type of physical harm. When you fly under the radar, nobody really cares. So I appreciate you giving me the
yeah,
chance to spread the word, man.
I gotta tell you, this is cool. Three average guys from Easton, um, getting together, chopping it up, all doing different things, coming together to just to share what you're doing and talk about it. And I wish you guys all the success in the world with your podcast. And hopefully this gets you a couple more listeners. And we'll put the show notes with a podcast to follow on the YouTube. And appreciate you guys giving the time here tonight. So
Thank you.
that'll do it for an episode of the Be Awesome podcast here from the Galactic Studios of my house here in Easton. So glad to get to see a couple of friends that we were kids a blink ago, and here we are, 50, talking about conspiracy theories. So, as always, it's holiday season. Buy a book. You can buy John's Angela Death books. He's got three of them. They were best selling on Amazon and Be Awesome. Buy my book on my website, beawesome.com. I personalize and sign every one of them. So that's the stack back there. Every day I get the honor and the privilege to sign all the online orders and personalize them. Or you can buy them on Amazon if you want them quicker without a signature. And we always love the 5-star ratings and reviews for our podcasts, YouTube's, social medias, anything you like. Just please share it with people because that's how we grow. So remember, if you can be anything, be awesome. Bye, everybody.